One of the things that I discovered in the course of writing this book is that the Genizah is not exceptional. The way Genizah historians usually tell the story is that the reason the Cairo Genizah survived is that there's a taboo in Judaism against destroying any written representation of God's name. So if you have God's name in Hebrew script, you can't deliberately destroy it. You have to let it decay by itself. So put it into a kind of dignified limbo. So maybe this is true, and maybe this is even true on the books. That's not even so clear. Certainly today it is, but was it in the 11th century? Not so clear. But if you went and did ethnographic field research in 11th or 12th century Fustat and walked around and interviewed every Jew you could find and said, why do you put things into the Genizah? You'd probably get dozens of different answers, as many answers as there are Jews, as the old joke goes. So that's the first thing, is that we can't assume that the Genizah was there because of piety. Then it turns out that there were other quote unquote Genizot that had nothing to do with Jews. So in Damascus, in the Umayyad Mosque, there is a structure in the middle of the courtyard that preserved about 200,000 both documents and manuscripts from almost the same period as the Genizah, more or less, a bit later, in various states of decay. There were books on shelves that were decaying, and then there were documents all over the floor that people had just kind of discarded there. Clearly a kind of Genizah-like structure. There are other examples from the Islamic world, but you can even go beyond the Islamic world to the Silk Roads. There are repositories, both archaeological and otherwise, of archives, sub-archives, and discarded manuscripts and documents all over the Silk Road that happen to have survived because of the climatic conditions. The most famous of these is at Dunhuang on the basically eastern terminus of the Silk Roads, where about 60,000 manuscripts were sealed in behind a wall, right? In exactly the same way you had the Genizah behind a wall of the Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo, not sealed. There was an opening where people were depositing things, but it's the same idea. So what I ended up having to conclude is that pre-modern cultures in which everything is handmade, right? This is a world of the handmade, simply didn't throw anything away. It wasn't like, they had a sanitation system with, garbage that got taken out. You used all parts of the animal. When the animal could no longer be used, you did something else with it. So, paper itself is recycled cloth, so recycled textiles, recycled clothing. And people would take paper and write on every corner of it and reuse it. And once they couldn't do that anymore, there was no way to simply get rid of it, right? So what you did was you put it into this kind of limbo. Was it sacred? I mean, you can argue about that. Maybe it was sacred in a certain very loose sense of the term, but I don't think it was piety. That was the reason people did this. So bottom line, yes, it's true that you have documents that have survived in this very disorganized way, but we shouldn't imagine that that necessarily entails a lack of reverence for the written word. Actually, in some sense, it entails a greater reverence for the written word.